Ladies and gentlemen, welcome aboard the Wright Flyer. As always, this is your captain, Randy Wright speaking, and I'd like to take this opportunity to personally thank you for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at our state-of-the-art radio program, Radio Aviation Excellence, the Wright Flyer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, let's go ahead and delve into the central topic that I have slated for today's program, because it's a rather interesting one. Well, it would appear that Whoopi Goldberg, famous actress from the 90s, known for Sister Act, and also known for being kind of a race huckster of late, is back in the news, this time of her own making. And she has, admittedly, and partially to her credit, apologized for what she said. Nevertheless, the Woke Mafia has come after one of their own due to what is being labeled, rightly in many ways, as insensitive speech. But it is partly typical for what we see in modern culture, particularly with the woke mob, lacking any clemency whatsoever. But what exactly happened? Well, back on Monday, Whoopi Goldberg made a bit of a whopper of a statement that is neither supported by historical context or evidence, even by primary sources, with respect to what occurred, back during the Second World War. This is a topic that should have been covered, certainly during Whoopi's lifetime, and history classes. It was within living memory of her time, and it's still within living memory, although the last vestiges of that era are fast fading from living memory. The whole aspect of the Holocaust, which was a terrible, terrible thing, was a race-based genocide. There's no denying it. The National Socialist German Workers' Party, or as it's known in common parlance, the Nazi Party, made no bones about what they were expecting with the final solution. Indeed, National Socialism, by its very nature, was a system designed to redistribute wealth, not on the basis of class, as Marxian ideology would, but on the basis of race. And I'll get more deeply into that, but the statements that are involved at the heart of this issue are that Whoopi Goldberg essentially stated that the Holocaust was not about race, that it was whites killing whites, that literally what it was about was man's inhumanity towards man. Well, part and parcel, that's correct, but there was a racial animus to it, and a racial component to the Holocaust. That is something which cannot be denied, even though Whoopi Goldberg had appeared on Stephen Colbert's late-night show in an attempt to double down on it after having issued an apology. What's ugly about the whole thing is that denying the racial caste component of it is to deny the true wickedness that rested at the heart of National Socialism. Yes, the left does everything in their power today to bamboozle us about whether or not they were right-wing. The only thing that they were right-wing, supposedly in comparison to, was communism, in that they still believed in some form of private ownership. But at the heart of it, National Socialism, it was a socialist ideology. It was a socialist ideology based on race. Thus, there was one race that should have things, and then other races based on their similarity in complexion and physical makeup to the quote-unquote master race, as the National Socialists saw it, would receive either less or have everything taken from them. And based off of this twisted, racist caste system that the Nazis developed, the Jews were at the bottom of it. That was what Adolf Hitler had been preaching since 1919, when he had encountered them in Vienna after the war. And this is when it really started to change him. Historically speaking, it's interesting to note that Hitler's mother's physician was Jewish. And there may have been some of the racial animus attached to it on Clara Hitler's dying of breast cancer, and the physician being unable to stop it. It's really impossible to know exactly where the change happened. If we were to believe Hitler's own words in Mein Kampf, he said it happened during his time as a struggling artist in Vienna, and then really after the First World War, because he bought into that nonsensical belief that many of the fringe groups, even the Marxian fringe groups, believed at the time, and that was the fabled stab in the back, that the Jews, in some sort of grand conspiracy, had stabbed the German hierarchy in command in the back, and that just wasn't true. And of course, Hitler also ascribed Marxism to being a Jewish philosophy or mindset because Karl Marx supposedly had Jewish ties and was of Jewish origin. All of that plays into it, but literally what is at the heart of the controversy in the case of Whoopi Goldberg was that she had stated that there was no race component, no racial component to this at all. Again, viewing it in a very telling fashion that it was white-on-white violence, and therefore it didn't matter. But that's not the case. That's certainly not how the Anti-Defamation League, who is part of the woke mentality now as well, would have viewed it. It's more akin, in point of fact, to a type of mindset and ideology that Whoopi Goldberg herself supports. And that is, of course, critical race theory. Critical race theory is based off of cultural Marxism, that line of Marxism that arose in the interwar periods at the Frankfurt School, which attempted to replace class as the struggle area, as they had started to see it as being ineffectual. In other words, they saw that the middle class would remain loyal so long as they had cultural ties to a society, and therefore the cultural Marxists realized they had to change something. Of course, at the heart of it remains struggle. All Marxian ideologies have struggle at their base. Indeed, all socialist ideologies have a struggle at their base. Again, this is a warped view of history, where history is supposedly linearly progressive, or it progresses in a linear, one-dimensional, or one-directional way, which really isn't true. History, in very many ways, is cyclical, though it is not completely cyclical. But just like critical race theory, the National Socialist ideology was built upon propaganda and focused upon race as opposed to class. And as always, struggle, as I said, remained at the very heart of it. So what happened to Goldberg? Goldberg was eventually, by the president of ABC News, suspended. And suspended for a period of 2 weeks. They said that they wanted her to think about and to reflect upon her hurtful statements and to come to the conclusion that she was wrong. In that sense, it's a struggle session. But even here, we see that there is a double standard. A double standard with cancel culture that is as grotesque as the statements Whoopi Goldberg herself made. And make no mistake about it, what Whoopi Goldberg said was detestable, and it was deplorable. The Holocaust was one of the greatest disasters, one of the greatest evils to have befallen humanity. But the cancel culture itself continues to have at its very core and at its very center a double standard. Of course, where it still applies, normally, is that although Goldberg apologized, that's not enough. The Woke Mafia doesn't understand clemency, and if the shoe was on the other foot, she wouldn't provide it either, meaning she wouldn't provide clemency to those she disagreed with either. We've seen this time and again with Gina Carano, who had compared the dehumanization that the very group that perpetrated the Holocaust had done to this type of cancel culture mob, this mobocracy and mob mentality that we have today. That was enough to get her fired. That was enough for the woke mob to want to put her through struggle sessions, to put her through a re-education, for want of a better term, because what she said was wrong think. And she stood up to that. And that was enough to say, hey, you know what? You hold an incorrect opinion, and therefore you should be cast aside. Even in Goldberg's case, it's you held a wrong opinion and we're going to chastise you for it. But because your opinion more aligns with ours than, say, a Gina Carano or even a Roseanne Barr, then you will get to keep your job, partly because you are of a certain racial character and you have a certain skin color, and partly because you have left-wing ideology and left-wing political views that allows you to still be right by our book on most accounts. Again, this is the same type of racial caste system that brought about the Holocaust to a certain degree. And the fact that they don't see this is the great irony of it all. Of course, even now, we have to be careful and have to couch our terms and words because of the way the tech oligarchs are going to approach this. Wrong think is still wrong think. Yet, at the heart of it, when you think of the American philosophy and what has made the United States of America and this grand and glorious experiment in representational government such a wonderful thing, it's the ability that we have to have free thought and to allow even ugly things to have some sort of a say that makes it work. But that's not the way they view it today. Still, the Supreme Court allowed for it in the Skokie case, where the Nazi Party in the United States, vile though it was, did have the First Amendment right to march in the heart of a town that was mostly Jewish. Yes, there is going to be ugly things about humanity, but the idea of freedom of expression has to be a central component to a free society. We're smart enough to know whom to condemn, and so long as we have a true free market of ideas, these vile and wicked ideas will be defeated. And we've seen that with Terry McAuliffe's fall to defeat to Governor Youngkin over his position on critical race theory in schools. But you see, this is why the left doesn't want there to be the ability to have free thought. It's because their ideology can truly be challenged. And yes, that was at the heart of the Holocaust too. People were afraid to react because of the dehumanizing that that vile National Socialist ideology fomented. And, of course, even under that system, there was a double standard. And yes, again, I point to the fact that Whoopi Goldberg was merely slapped on the wrist for this. Whereas someone else, like Gina Carano, or anyone else who held differing opinions. Let's take, Mel Gibson, for instance. His horrific statements. Because his anti-Semitic statements were made when they were, he was able to come back from it, but there's still attempts to silence him and to keep him out of Hollywood. And he was ostracized for over a decade. Whoopi Goldberg gets a 2-week suspension. Yes, this double standard is glaring. It's open and obvious. It's an ugly, cancerous sore. But the Woke Mafia doesn't want to acknowledge that because they have their own caste system. They have their own hierarchy that you can't break free from. And again, just like the evil National Socialist ideology, this is one that is based on dehumanizing. The idea is that they erase an individual's character, an individual's achievements, and an individual's heartfelt contrition over things that they have done wrong, because they want it to be guilt by association and a group guilt. But even there, it's selective. In a real sense, what they're doing is they're engaging in the logical fallacy known as a Mott and Bailey. The Mott and Bailey logical fallacy is based on having one argument that's a strong one, but based on a definition, and then another one that's a weaker one, and then to switch it in mid-argument so that your opponent never has the ability to gain the high ground. And so you can continually engage in an intellectually disingenuous exchange and never allow your opponent to get anywhere, because it's smoke and mirrors. It's changing things at the drop of a hat. This, of course, is an ugly game of politics. It's a politically charged narrative. It's one in which the raw emotionalism of it's a true thing. And they would rather things just stop at raw emotionalism and that we not have a deeper, more meaningful conversation than that. Because, again, they want to be able to silence anyone who disagrees with them, as they are unable to compete. However, their narrative really is starting to fall apart. Yes, we should teach about the Holocaust. Yes, this whole thing with Whoopi Goldberg was around a cancel culture issue. The woke mobs had taken out the graphic novel Moz that was written by a Holocaust survivor, something that I read in my World War II history class in high school. It was a powerful work. And of course, they claimed that it was removed for nudity and curse language, but nudity happened in the Holocaust. And no, there really wasn't anything that was sexually inappropriate about it. It demonstrated the things as anamorphic mouses and the cats being Nazis, essentially, rounding them up and taking them to the gas chambers. Yes, it's horrible. It's graphic. It was a terrible thing. But what happened during the Second World War and during the Holocaust was a horrible thing. If we are going to be able to confront these horrific things, and if we are going to be able to overcome what happened in the past and do everything within our power to prevent such vile and wicked things from ever happening again, we are going to have to be able to discuss this. And that means being able to have a free exchange of ideas. Yes, there has to be some level of discomfort in the discourse that occurs with history. History has a lot of brutal and ugly things about it. There's no way of avoiding that, because there's brutal and ugly things in all chapters of humanity. We are a flawed species. That having been said, we can teach this in a logical way, and we can approach this in a reasonable way. But we're going to have to realize that contrition and second chances have to exist. That we have to recognize people make mistakes, left, right, anywhere. The political aggrandizement really is going to have to come to an end. And that's going to take a major change in policy, in political views, and in the way we interact culturally. With the rise of social media, one of the greatest changes that has occurred is that we don't talk necessarily to one another as human beings. We grasp around ideas, and we attempt to reduce human beings to ideas. But humans, in and of themselves, are greater than ideas. We are complex things. And therefore, our beliefs are complex. Each of us individually experiences life a little differently than the other. And therefore, we each have our own unique perspective to contribute. But there still has to be some universal moralities and truths that are accepted. Moralities being that human life has value, that murder is wrong. And, yes, there may be disagreements as to what punishment should apply to murder, or where murder definitions should apply. But that's why we have the legal system. And that's why the legal system has to be an impartial system. Yet, With the woke ideology, we're getting away from that as well. That's the danger we're facing. And the whole Whoopi Goldberg scenario provides us with a warning. It's the same warning that we should always be careful of in history, no matter how abhorrent things may appear. We have to be able to discuss things logically, and that means having a dialogue, not a monologue, and it means not just attempting to shut somebody up because we've been made to feel uncomfortable. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank you again for choosing to fly over the friendly airwaves with us here at the Wright Flyer. I hope to see you again the next time we fly over the friendly airwaves. Please do take care. See you around.